All right, I'm just warning you up front. This is going to be a rough one here. We're going to do the Washington. Washington. We're going to do the Washington Huskies today, the 2024 college football season preview and a game-by-game prediction for the Huskies, who, of course, had an amazing year last year, 14-1. Their only loss coming in the national championship game, 10-0 in the 10-0. Was it 10-0? I guess in the undefeated in the Pac-12 champs. Beat Oregon twice. Won their first round playoff game against Texas. And then like I mentioned, losing to Michigan in the national title game. It's an unbelievable season. Michael Penix, Rome Odunze, defense good enough. I think it was mostly an offensive-led team, but the defense was pretty good too. Just a really, really good, one of the best years Washington has ever had. Definitely their best year since, 91, I guess, when they won the national title. A really, really good year for Washington. Unfortunately, a lot of changes have occurred between, the time the time expired on that national championship game and the time they get ready to kick it off for 2024. The entire coaching staff, of course, is gone, with DeBoer getting the job at Alabama. They did bring in Fish from Arizona, who I like and improved, can be a pretty good coach in his short amount of time at Arizona. But almost the entire roster is also being flipped over here. They lost 20 of the primary starters. I say primary because it's getting harder and harder to determine your starting 22 a lot of times in college football, particularly on offense. Depending on what set maybe you run out onto the field for that first play, maybe you run a 4-wide set for your first play of the game. Okay, next week, maybe you run a 2-wide set. So your starters can change. But anyway, they lost about 20 primary contributors, you could call them starters, off of last year's team, including some of the ones that I just named there, on top of the fact that they are moving from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten, a conference that I think is both better than the Pac-12, and you're going to have sort of the added bonus of having to play a bunch of road games in unfamiliar environments involving a lot of travel. And, we can debate all that another day. It's kind of been debated over the last year about whether or not these teams should be in conferences where they have to travel and blah, blah, blah. That's not really the point. TCU a couple of years ago is kind of the closest thing I can find to Washington, really. I mean, they didn't turn their coaching staff over or join a new conference or whatever, but they were kind of an out of the blue team. And Washington wasn't totally out of the blue last year. DeBoer's been a good coach. Expectations were high, but I don't know that very many people had Washington slated for the national title game at this time last year. TCU had a remarkable run the year before with Max Duggan and, an NFL wide receiver and a really good defense, and a lot of things went their way. And then they lost a lot of those key pieces. And then the following year, this past season, they were 5-7. They're kind of an afterthought, hardly talked about at all once the season started. I'm not certain that's going to happen with Washington, but it does seem like the possibility exists for Washington to find themselves in a similar situation in 2024 because of just the massive turnover as far as coaches, massive turnover as far as roster and players, and a brand new conference, a conference that, at least in my mind, is more difficult than the Pac-12. And look, the Pac-12 was really, really good last year. There's no question about it. Just generally speaking, in any given random year, the Big Ten are going to be a little bit more difficult. But let's take a look at Washington and see what they might be able to do. I mentioned 14-1 last year. Now moving into the Big Ten. Let's look a little bit at the offense and then a little bit at the defense, what they lost, what they brought in through the portal, that kind of thing. Shout out to Josh F., by the way, too, over on the Uncle Lou Patreon page. He suggested I do this preview and prediction video for the Washington Huskies. So, Josh, thank you for supporting the show and the channel over there on the Patreon page. If you're a member on the Patreon page, make sure you get over there quick and let me know what team you want to see. The first post on my Patreon page is a post I made about these prediction videos, and you'll see the comments. Everybody's just typing a team that they want to see me do a prediction for. That's where I get these teams from every day. First thing I do is I go to the Patreon page, I scroll through the list, and I pick a team off of there. And today was Josh F. with the Washington Huskies. So Josh, thank you. And the rest of you that are on the Patreon page, make sure you head over there and let me know what team you want to see. There's a link to the Patreon page in the description of this video. But back to the Washington offense. They lost a lot, and obviously Michael Penix stands out as sort of the star player from that team. I guess maybe him and Adunze. But I think the biggest loss outside of maybe Kalen DeBoer that they're going to suffer is on the offensive line. They are losing all 5 of their starters along the offensive line. And not only was their offensive line good enough for Washington to win the Pac-12 and make the national title game last year, they won the Joe Moore Award, the award for the best offensive line in the country. And they're all gone, all 5 of them. Now, that's not to say that the next 5 in line to start there aren't any good at all. They may be. But chemistry, cohesion, learning to play together, experience, those are going to be things that this offensive line lacks. Obviously, they also lost their quarterback, Michael Penix, the best quarterback maybe that Washington has ever had. Definitely the best quarterback they've had in a long, long time. You look at the wide receivers, I already mentioned Adunze, but they lost McMillan as well. So 2 of their top wide receivers are gone. What are they replacing those things with? Well, they brought in transfer quarterback Will Rogers, formerly of Mississippi State, one of the all-time leading passers in the SEC. Now, he spent 3 or 4 years, of course, at Mississippi State up under Mike Leach running the air raid offense. They were literally throwing the ball 50 to 60 times a game. So I'm not sort of dismissing the fact that he's thrown for a ton of yards, but it's worth knowing at least that the path to that number of yards came through throwing the ball 50 to 60 times. There's varying opinions on Will Rogers and how good he is or isn't. Those are just the facts of the matter. You bring him into play quarterback. We'll see how he does there up under Jed Fish's system in Washington. At the wide receiver position, Jeremiah Hunter, you bring in from Cal. He's led Cal in receiving yards, I believe, each of the last 2 seasons. So a proven guy there at a bad team, Cal, now looking to make a move or make a mark up there at Washington. Running back Jonah Coleman, he came with Jed Fish from Arizona, and you get Cameron Davis, I believe is his name. He was out all of last year with an injury. He's now fully healthy and ready to go for this year. So not a transfer, not even a new player, but somebody we didn't see at all last year because of injury is back now and healthy. So Jonah Coleman, Cam Davis will be the running backs, replacing what they lost from last year. You look over on the defensive side of the ball. Unlike the offense, they've got some key pieces returning on the defense. And while some of these players may not have been technically starters, they all played a ton in every single game. 2 linebackers, Bruner and again, look, I mispronounce these names in almost every single video I do. I don't name these people. In a lot of cases, I don't even speak their particular language. All right. So you're free to point out the fact that I am mispronouncing their names. I don't really care. I didn't name them. So it is what it is. Bruner and Tuputala. That's that Tuputala. Yeah. Anyway, you get two linebackers back that were key contributors last year. Here's the worst one here. This safety, Cameron. And I'm not even going to attempt to say his last name. If you're a Washington fan, you know who I'm talking about. If you're not a Washington fan, you might not. But trust me, the name is completely unpronounceable. We'll just call him by his first name, Cameron. Cornerback, Jackson, also back from last year. So back end of the defense does return some key contributors from last year when you look at the linebackers in the secondary. Through the portal, they brought in another cornerback, Pricesuck. Is that his name? I'm probably saying that one wrong too. He's from Arizona. He's really, really good. I believe he was second team all Pac-12 last year, if I'm remembering that right. And a brand new defensive coordinator, Steve Belichick. Yes, that Belichick. Son of famous or infamous New England Patriots head coach Bill Belichick. That is your defensive coordinator this year at Washington, Steve Belichick. So a ton of new pieces on this team when you look. Returning production is something that I've talked about in a lot of these preview and prediction videos, just to give you kind of an idea. Okay, how much of last year's version of what we saw is returning for this year? And in the case of Washington, they're 130th in the country out of 134 teams in terms of returning production. They do not return much of anything from last year's team. Again, brand new coaching staff on top of the fact that they lost all those key players that we mentioned earlier. So 130th in returning production. So basically a brand new team top to bottom this year for Washington, with the exception of a couple of contributors on defense. They return only 19% of their offensive production from last year and about half of their defensive production from last year. Again, that's good for 130th out of 134 teams in the country when it comes to returning production. What does Vegas think about Washington's chances in 2024, their first year in the Big Ten, coming off a great year last year, playoff win and a national title loss to Michigan? Vegas expects them to win 7 games. That's the over-under win total right now for Washington. I think that's probably a little bit optimistic and a little bit high. And again, I like Jedd Fisch. I think, long term, over the next 5 years or whatever, I think there's a very good chance they're winning more than 7 games on average a year. First year, new conference, completely turned over roster, Jedd Fisch in a new environment up in Washington. Hard for me to see them getting to 7 games. Let's throw the schedule up on the screen here and see if we can figure it out. All right, they start off with a couple of games that should be able to sort of a get your feet wet type of scenario here to start the season. Now, I'm never a big fan of starting the season with multiple games like this. Georgia's done it before. I don't like it. It's just boring to watch as a fan. But if there was ever a year for a team where it would be extremely beneficial for them to start a season like this, it's probably this year's Washington team. They start with Weber State and Eastern Michigan. Now, these are 2 games that Washington should be able to win regardless of all the turnover, new coaching staff, new conference, whatever you want to, all of that. They should be able to win both of these games, I would think, fairly comfortably. And this will give that coaching staff and the players up underneath that new coaching staff an opportunity to kind of get their feet wet, feel their way around, get their legs up underneath them, that kind of thing. Become comfortable with everything that, goes on in terms of playing a game, from getting the plays in and out to substituting the players in and out, the language, the verbiage, the play calls, all of that stuff that's going to be completely new and different for Washington this year. Gives them a couple of games here early in the season, right out of the gate, where I think they can work a lot of that stuff out. Third week, and I think they'll win both of those games, obviously. Third week of the season, in-state rival, Washington State, one of the kind of left-behind teams from the Pac-12, them and Oregon State, of course, currently basically homeless when it comes to finding a conference. I think they've got some sort of agreement in place with the Mountain West to play a bunch of those teams or something like that, but they're basically wandering the wilderness right now, Washington State and Oregon State. Always an interesting game here. Anytime you get 2 in-state teams going at it, the tempers are high, the rivalry factor. I still think Washington finds a way to win this game. Now, here's the thing. Washington State feels slighted. They're like, the jilted ex-girlfriend or something that got left behind for something new and shiny. They're going to have a lot of motivation to win this game, Washington State is. Kind of a prove your point type of game, right? Oh, you wanted Washington instead of us? Well, watch this. We're better than Washington. I expect this to be one of the best games Washington State will play all year. They will give everything they have to try to win this game. And they could win it. Washington State is 100% capable of winning this game against a basically rebuilt Washington team early in the year. I'm going to give Washington the benefit of the doubt here. I'm primarily leaning on my respect for Jedd Fisch here. I think they find a way to get this win. So I'm going to, in a game that I really think is kind of 50-50 in terms of trying to pick it right now, I'm going to sort of lean Washington's way. So maybe later on in the schedule, if there's another game that I kind of view as 50-50 and maybe I go against Washington, you'll cut me a little bit of slack. But I'm going to have you starting 3-0 here. And then your first Big Ten game at home. This is another game that I think Washington kind of, I don't want to say lucky draw here, but this is advantageous, I think. Your first ever Big Ten conference game, number 1, is at home. Number 2 is not against any of the quote unquote big boys of the Big Ten. Northwestern has had decent seasons sprinkled in here and there over the last 10 to 15 years. They've had some 9 and 10 win seasons. And last year, they were one of the best stories in all of college football, really. If you remember, about this time last year, their entire coaching staff basically got let go, or the head coach did, for a hazing incident that had been reported there. And about 6 or 7 weeks before the season, they had to find a new head coach. Well, of course, you can't do that, so they promote from within. And they ended up going from like 1 win to like 6 or 7 or 8, I think 8 wins maybe last year. So a really good story. But I don't think they're a great team overall. I just don't. And they've got to travel way out west. It's them that's going to be in an unfamiliar environment here on the road at Washington. I think Washington actually gets a win in their first ever Big Ten conference game. Congratulations, you're undefeated in Big Ten play. And at the top of the leaderboard in the Big Ten after week 4 with a big home win over Northwestern, I've got Washington starting 4-0. That is great news. Here comes the bad news. You got to play on the road at Rutgers. Rutgers is one of these Big Ten teams that no one ever talks about. No one ever picks them to win anything. But they are not a terrible team or a terrible program. Greg Schiano is a proven head coach, regardless of what you think about him. He's probably the most successful coach Rutgers has ever had, at least in the last 30 or 40 years. Now, he hasn't been as successful in this second go-round at Rutgers as he was in his first go-round there. Of course, he left for a while to go to the NFL, and now he's back. But Rutgers is this team in the Big Ten, what used to be the Big Ten East, that lost to Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State every single year. So nobody ever really talked about them because you knew they weren't beating those 3 teams. And so kind of whatever else happened, it didn't really matter, at least not from a national perspective. They're a decent team. You got to travel all the way out there to play them. I think that they get the win there. I think you take your first loss, you lose on the road at Rutgers. However, I will say that is a game I could see Washington potentially winning. This isn't the type of thing where I look at this game and I go, well, there's no way Washington's winning that one. I think Washington could win the Rutgers game. I'm giving Rutgers the benefit of the doubt. Again, to go back to the Washington State game, I'm siding with Washington there in a game that I feel like could go either way. Here, I'm leaning the other way. Because it's on the road, I'm going to give Rutgers the win. Washington's first loss of the year. You come back home, that's great, but you got to play Michigan. And look, Michigan's got a brand new coaching staff as well. Michigan lost several key players off of last year's team as well, mostly on the offensive side of the ball. But they're still going to have one of the best defenses in the country, period. And it's hard for me to imagine Washington being good enough in year 1, even at home, to pull off this win here against a team like Michigan. I think you catch your second loss in a row. On the road at Iowa. If you can figure out a way to get into the 20s, you're probably going to beat Iowa. At least that's how it's been the past few years. They've had one of the worst offenses in all of football. Now, they finally fired their offensive coordinator, who just so happened to be the coach's son. Kirk Ferentz, of course, longtime head coach at Iowa, had made his son, Brian Ferentz, offensive coordinator, and it was just embarrassingly bad. So, new look offense for Iowa. How much improved will it be the first year there? Not sure, but I am a believer in their defense again, and you have to play them there. I also think Washington loses that one. So, I've got Washington starting 4-0, but then following that up with 3 straight losses, 4-3 heading into the second half of the season. You get your first bye week, comes at a pretty good time, at least if my predictions are anywhere close to true, because you would have lost a few games in a row there. Good time to kind of have a bye week, regroup a little bit, prepare yourselves for the second half of the season. On the road at Indiana, I went back and forth on this one a bunch of times. And I'm just going to be honest with you with what it came down to for me. Do I think Washington is a bowl team in 2024 or not? And I don't. So I've got them losing that one at Indiana. Not a good year last year. Another team that's kind of starting over. I think it's a second-year head coach there. It might be a first-year head coach there. First, second-year head coach there. Had some success other places. We'll see what he's able to do at Indiana. I'm not all that high on him. But again, I actually had this as a win for Washington when I just sort of went through the schedule real quick the first time. Well, here's sort of how the sausage is made, which I don't know how many people will care about this or not. But so when I get ready to do these predictions, the very first thing I do is just look at the schedule. That's it. That's the only thing I look at it first. And I make a rough draft. Win this game, win that game, lose this game, win that game, lose, win, lose. Could go either way, win, lose. That's the first thing I do. Then I look up as much information as I can find in a reasonable amount of time. I don't have a team of people feeding me stats or anything like that. So I look at last year. I look at transfer portal. I look at recruiting rankings. I look at the coaches that have changed. I look at transfers they brought in. Whatever I can find, basically. And then I go back to the schedule a second time and sort of make corrections or changes based off the information I just maybe have read. When I went through the schedule the first time, I had Washington winning on the road at Indiana. And I got through with the schedule, and I'm sort of jumping ahead here a little bit, but I'll just put the rest of the wins and losses up on the screen right now so you can see them. So with a win at Indiana, that would have made Washington 6-6, and I just started looking at it. I don't know if they're going to be able to make a bowl game this year. And again, that's not completely unheard of. You're going to say, oh, they're not from the national title game, they can't make a bowl. Again, TCU was 5-7 last year in the Big 12 after making the national title game the year before. Now, I'm not suggesting that's a direct correlation, but we've seen teams go from playing in a national title to not making a bowl game before. In fact, we just saw it last season. So everything combined here with Washington, new coach, losing basically 20 of your 22 starters, a move to the Big Ten, some really difficult road games at Iowa, at Rutgers, at Penn State, at Oregon. I mean, these are just brutal games here for what basically amounts to an expansion team in Washington. So I went back to the Indiana game and changed that to a loss, which puts Washington's record at 5-7. But let's continue on. Southern Cal, I think you lose there. If there's a game on this schedule, maybe that you're looking at and you're going, okay, I kind of agree that Washington's not going to be a great team, but is there a game somewhere where they can kind of pull off an unexpected big or semi-big win? Maybe the Southern Cal game. I've got Southern Cal winning. I have this down as a loss for Washington. But, defensively, until I see them do something different than what I've seen Lincoln Riley do for 8 or 9 years in a row, it's hard to have a whole lot of confidence in what they're going to do on that side of the ball. They've got a new quarterback there, so I guess that's a little bit of an unknown for Southern Cal. But again, if we're going to hold Lincoln Riley's track record defensively against him, then we have to give him the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the offense. All the guy's done is find Heisman caliber QBs for 7, 8, 9 years in a row, going, whether it's Oklahoma or Southern Cal. So it's hard to kind of count on Southern Cal not having a good offense when they've had a good offense, at least good to great quarterback play almost every single year that he's ever been a head coach. So again, you hold the defense against him. Okay, you got to give him credit for the offense. But maybe that's the one game and you say, well, that's not a big win. Southern Cal's not very good. Well, they're a big name. So maybe that's one you could get there, but I've got it as a loss. On the road at Penn State, I think they're a legitimate playoff contender. I think it's more likely Penn State winds up in the playoffs than that they don't. You have to play them there. I can't see you winning that one. UCLA, I gave you a win here. This is another one that I think is kind of 50-50. They're in a similar situation to Washington, brand new coaching staff, and they got put in a really bad spot because Chip Kelly left them high and dry like at the end of January. Pretty much all the available coaches are gathered up by then, and Chip Kelly kind of out of the blue just gave UCLA one of these and decided to go be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. So they didn't have a lot of choices there. They lost that quarterback, Dante Moore, in the transfer portal up to Oregon. So it could be a rough year for UCLA. They're facing the same challenges Washington is in terms of playing in a brand new conference with a lot of unfamiliar environments and lots of travel. This is another one where I'm giving Washington a win, where it wouldn't shock me if UCLA finds a way to win the game. But again, I'm giving Washington the benefit of the doubt here with a win. Then you get your second bye week before probably your biggest game of the year, at least for the fans, a rivalry game here, Washington and Oregon. Washington's beat Oregon several years in a row. I think that comes to an end this year. I think Oregon is a legitimate, not just playoff contender, but national title contender, and you have to play them there. You do get a bye week ahead of that game, and that's huge. I just think Oregon will be too much this year. I think you lose that one. So you add all that up, that puts Washington at 5-7. Again, would I be shocked if they went 6-6? No. Vegas has them at 7 wins. There's no way I would bet the over there. I don't see any way imaginable Washington goes 8-4 against this schedule, which is what they would have to do in order for you to win a bet at over 7 wins. 7 is probably the right number. But if I was going to bet over under, I'd bet the under. I've got them at 5-7. I could definitely see 6-6. And I do think 7-5 is an outside possibility. But I'm at 5-7. Be sure and let me know down below how stupid I am, and have a good morning.